Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. I have a very interesting and unconventional guest today. He was raised on a small farm in Pennsylvania and is committed to the preservation of farmlands. But what's most interesting is his response when asked where he stands politically. His typical response is he considers himself a lapsed Republican, an unrepented Perotist, which I don't even know what that means, but we're going to find out, a failed Green, and a frustrated Democrat. He's an astute observer of the hijinks being played not only on both sides of the political aisle, but also with numerous NGOs and activist groups across the US. And of course, being in agriculture, we know about all of these issues. So today we're going to discuss how he got to this place, how he looks at this myriad of issues that agriculture and essentially the nation is facing, and also how to navigate the issues to prepare yourself for the voting season, which is dead ahead. From Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I would like to welcome Executive Director of the Institute for Sound Public Policy, Kevin Lynn. Welcome, Kevin, and thank you so much for being here. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, Chrissy, thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to it as well, because I think it's going to be didactic and maybe even therapeutic for both of us, because I think our political journeys have run parallel to each other in terms of awakenings and zeitgeist, understanding what the zeitgeist is, and probably not changing a whole lot, but finding the political world around us has changed dramatically.
Yeah, I think that's so important to really think about. And so let's talk about your political background first of all. Can you give us a rundown of this journey to where you are today?
Sure. It's interesting. I I was always interested in politics. When you sat around the table at my house growing up, you had to be able to hold your own. And on Friday nights, when friends of my parents would come over, we kids would just sit quietly while they discussed all the world issues. So I think it's kind of in the blood. But I went in the military for 11 years after high school as a point of propriety or politeness. You didn't typically discuss political leanings or views in the military. We all had them. But when I left the military, I became a young Republican. And it was interesting because my values were probably tend to be right of center. Now, interestingly enough, I kind of didn't quite fit in there because I believed in things like, well, healthcare for everyone. I had just enjoyed socialized medicine for 11 years. And when you look at my medical records, it's like, I'm glad I had it. Whereas, I have a friend today who, he saw his kid playing in the tree and he's like, oh my God, do you know what the copay on that is if he falls? So, but then in 1992, I was living in Phoenix, Arizona, and you'd asked, what is a Perotist? Well, I was a faithful follower of Ross Perot, who ran for president in 1992. He was a millionaire businessman, pretty much self-made. And I had myself gone through some real economic difficulties. After I got out of the military, I launched a business with a friend of mine. It didn't go well, and I was down to a bicycle. But through the campaign, I had organized the second largest organization for Perot in Arizona on a bicycle. And
No way.
after, yeah, but it was the funnest adventure because, like, I would get, a list of people who had an interest in the campaign, and I'd like bicycle into a trailer park, and people would invite me in for dinner, and it was just the most awesome thing. Maybe do an astrology reading on me while I was having lunch with someone or something like that. But it ended up being the most wonderful experience. And afterward, I was offered a job with what they called United We Stand America, which came after the campaign because the campaign had failed to get Perot elected. But we created United We Stand America. So I joined in that and ended up working for Mr. Perot for 2 years. In Phoenix and then later in Dallas. And then after that, I kind of went into a stasis in terms of politics. I ended up working for a very large accounting firm. They moved me to Los Angeles. It was 2004. So fast forward, 10 years. And Howard Dean was running for president. And there were a lot of values that he held that I liked. And he had his Dean for America. Now, after his failed attempt, that became Democracy for America. And there was not a sister organization, but another organization that a guy named Dennis Kucinich had run for president, and he was very popular. And he created, after his presidential campaign, Progressive Democrats of America. So here I've gone from being a Republican to being a Democrat. Now, we were considered progressives, and that's, I think, a term we should dwell on a little bit, because in 2004, 2006, it was easy to spot progressives. We were either wearing Dennis Kucinich swag or Howard Dean swag. Right. It came down to it. And I became, as a volunteer, an organizer again. And according to Howard Dean's brother, Jim, no pun there, Jim, but he said, you have the most effective organization west of the Mississippi. It was in the Pasadena, San Gabriel Valley. And what was great about it is we were dedicated to really two things. The one big thing was out of Iraq, and then Medicare for all. But also in our group, we really wanted to weed out the corporate Dems that had ruled, particularly in California. And then, interestingly enough, even Republicans would come to us and say, hey, can I get your endorsement? Because our values were, we wanted to be fiscally responsible. We wanted to be pragmatic in our approach to politics and actually getting things done at the street level. It was during this time that, I was in Adam Schiff's office because he was our congressman at the time in this area. They've redistricted since. But I went in to see him with the mayors of several towns and some members of the clergy to really read on the Riot Act, on the Patriot Act, because he was the guy, he was the architect of the Patriot Act. Right. And so I'm talking to this guy, and my one statement in my prepared address was, it's apparent to us that the values of our found in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have somehow been lost on a former prosecutor. And at that point, he literally rises from his seat. And I said, wait, may I finish? Because he took great umbrage with what I had said. And then when we were all leaving, he's taking everyone's statements, and I gave him mine. He let it drop to the floor. But that was the idea, was to speak truth to power and to regain control for the people to regain control of the Democratic Party, take it away from the corporatists and what they called at the time, blue dog, Democrats, something like that. But interestingly enough, we were so successful because Howard Dean had become the head of the Democratic National Committee, and that was forced. What people don't understand was that was not the plan. He was supposed to go away forever after his presidential campaign, but all the progressives, the PDA folks, the Kucinich folks, and the Dean folks, we all met at the same time in different locations across the country and gave the party an ultimatum. And that was either Howard becomes head of the DNC or we walk.
Wow.
And they buckled. Howard became head of the DNC, started what he called the 50-state program. So we had 2 paid people in every state to help organizing. And we got to work. There was a group east of us in Riverside, and this one woman tells this great story where they had the list of Democrats and they were knocking on doors, and they were down the street a ways, and this woman comes running down the street going, come back, you're the Democrats. Like, hi, I'm here. So net, the Democrats regained the House in 2006. But unfortunately, it was probably too soon. The Democratic Party needed to spend a lot more time on its knees with an active force inside it trying to reform it. And unfortunately, the progressives, the good ones, either got simply elbowed out, others got co-opted into this thing. And, you know, the lesson for me was we simply fed the beast at the end of the day. And that was a hard pill to swallow. And, you know, but in that period of time, I had moved out of Pasadena to downtown LA and gotten a seat on the executive board of the California Democratic Party. And so I got to, as they say, see how the sausage is made. And I wasn't happy with that either. But I got the reputation of someone that we like his organizational skills, and he can't be bought. Like they'll sit if you're doing really well, I'll just pass this on for the folks. Someone's going to sit down with you. It'll be over a lunch or a dinner, and they'll ask you what you want. You know, what do you want? You want to be assemblyman? You want to, you know, boy, you can go all the way. You can, and you know, the correct response is go yourself. I'm sorry.
That's awesome.
So
noted.
Right. So what I found there, I personally, I really latched on to this theme of immigration and how it was not working for California and the United States. And I'm from an immigrant tradition. My mother was born and raised on a dairy farm in County Kerry, Ireland. My great-grandfather on my father's side had come over from Lithuania, worked the coal mines, got black lung. You know, it's just, you know, it's an immigrant tale. But there was a time in the country when it was very restrictive, like when my mother came, and it was well regulated and it worked for everyone. Immigrants did well, native born did well. We built the middle class. And then in the mid 60s, we liberalized it. And, you know, I actually talk about this a bit in the newsletter that'll be coming out tomorrow. But that, to me, I was astounded that so many people in the Democratic Party were repelled by that, because at a town hall meeting, I said, I've yet to see how this is going to improve our healthcare delivery, our schools, our infrastructure. You know, no one's bringing in sewer systems with them and bridges and schools. It's all outlay. We're not benefiting from this. And that kind of led me to where I am now. That, you know, so that's where I'd become this frustrated Democrat. You know, I tried my hand at, you know, the environmental issues, but it was just too frustrating to deal with people in that spectrum I had found, or on that spectrum. But I am now an independent as a result of all this. But I actually, during that time, was one of the founders of a group called Progressives for Immigration Reform. And that really started, I was identified from this town hall that I attended on immigration, where it's like, oh my God, here's this Democrat talking about restricting immigration. We should talk to him. And I found there were
an oxymoron, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I found there were a lot more of me out there. And it led to a conversation with a group called Californians for Population Stabilization, which then led to a conversation with Governor Dick Lamb, the late Governor Dick Lamb of Colorado, who, interestingly enough, he was a 3-term governor, the longest who'd ever been in office as governor. He was a Democrat, but he's equally loved and hated by Republicans and Democrats. He was a very bottom line, like during his tenure, he didn't want the Winter Games for the Olympics, because he penciled it out. He said, this isn't going to work. And he was a real thinker. And he was like, we need to create a group that will have outreach, you know, to people left of center on this issue. And I was one of the founding board members. We hired an executive director, set up shop in DC. I keep an office here in DC and find myself having to come down here a couple times a month. And then in 2017, Leah, who was our director, wanted to move on. I said, you know, I'll take it over for a little while and, you know, find an executive director, then move on. But Donald Trump was in office. Immigration had moved to the forefront, and we just found ourselves being so busy. And even although I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016, I campaigned for him in 2020
Wow.
because we met with him in the White House on August 3rd, 2020. What was going on was there were about 200, well, no, in this case, it was about 110 IT workers, information technology workers at the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is a quasi public private utility set up in the southeastern states during the Great Depression to bring power to rural areas. And they were going to outsource their jobs after they train their replacements to three, what we call H-1B visa dependent consulting firms. And an H-1B visa is a visa that is for a white collar worker to come here. We let out about 120,000 a year of these, and companies use them to displace Americans. So they'll set up a consulting firm like my old alma mater, Ernst & Young, will have a group that will approach a company like a TVA or a Disney or a Northeast Utilities or an Abbott Labs or a CSX Railroad and say, look, outsource your IT to us. It'll be a lot cheaper. You don't have to deal with employee issues anymore. And the people working at these consulting firms are typically H-1B workers. And 74% of H-1Bs let out go to people from one country, and that is India, because they're work for cheap. They're essentially indentured servitude, because unlike most, like your listeners and audience watchers are probably most familiar with the H-2A, the agricultural visa.
Yes.
So all these employment visas are they're temporary. You come for a season, you come for a period of time, and you leave. But when they created the H-1B visa in 1990, they did something really unscrupulous. They made it a dual intent visa. Now, what happens is, so you get someone here who comes here for 3 years on it. They'll re-up for another, they'll extend for another 3 years. But the company can sponsor them for a green card. So it's like dangling that carrot in front of them. And so what happens is the worker is essentially is indentured. They'll accept any pay. They will accept any working conditions to remain in the country. So I'm sorry, I digress, but that got us to the White House to talk to Donald Trump. And he signed that day an executive order that I helped write that would basically fortify the federal government agencies from using H-1B visa dependent consulting firms. We saved the IT jobs at the Tennessee Valley Authority. He fired the chairman of the board, one of the directors. And during the meeting, the CEO sent a message saying he's rescinded the outsourcing of the jobs. And what was great was all the press were there. C-SPAN was there, CNN, MSNBC, and we saved these jobs. And the tragic thing is, like we talked about my political background, and the Jacobin magazine. And for those you don't know, the Jacobin magazine is essentially a very, very left-wing publication. Actually, they're communists. And I subscribe to it because, they seem to, there are people, they have economists like this guy, Doug Henwood. I think he's great at analyzing problems, but their solutions, forget about it. But here I'm a subscriber, and they do this article on that event at the White House. And in a way, it was a backhanded compliment to me, but they're like, why is this nativist xenophobe, because that's what you are when you want to restrict immigration, saving union jobs and not us. And so that's why I became a very dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporter at that point, because he did what I expect a politician to do. There was a fellow by the name of Sennett years ago wrote a book called The Fall of the Public Man. And in it, he talks about don't elect a politician. Don't vote for them because you like them or you think they're honest or they agree with you on this. Elect someone who's going to do what you tell them to do.
Right.
I mean,
Good point.
in 1993, we had helped in 92 get this guy, Sam Coppersmith, elected, a Democrat in a more Republican leaning district. It was the Perotist that got him elected. Well, we found out that he was going to double cross us on the North American Free Trade Agreement. So we went to visit him in his office. And by the end of the meeting, he was slumped down in his chair because he knew he could never hold the district. He betrayed us anyway, but he didn't run for re-election because he knew he wouldn't hold the district.
Right.
And that's where, Chrissy, that's where we want these bastards. We
Yeah.
don't think, oh, all right, I'm going to forgive them for this. No, we want them to know they work for us, as Ross Perot used to say.
Good point.
You know, I'm Ross, you're the boss. That's unfortunately what we have is a establishment that is pretty empirical at the end of the day. They talk about us in back rooms as if we're dogs.
Yeah.
Oh my God, you wouldn't believe what I have to do for these guys. Oh my God. It's like, as opposed to being grateful for serving us. So I'm sorry, I went on for a while.
No, that's awesome. I really like the insight and I really appreciate and I think we've really lost this in the divide, is that focus on the issues, right? Not on the person or the ideology. It's hard. It's a slippery slope. It's really hard to not fall that way. But I feel like it's important to start talking about this because as we come into the election season, it's only going to get worse. And
Yes.
I'm often asked about my own political standing. And it's probably because most people know I'm originally from Canada, but I was raised in a border town. So I've been able to closely watch both countries throughout my whole life. And I've been very interested in it my whole life. So when it comes down to it, at my very core, I stand for free speech, property rights, secure borders, religious freedom, and personal responsibility. So that's where I start.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look at the issues because there are so many issues. And then you listen to candidates on both sides who are speaking. And just like you said, who's going to do something about it? Right. So, of course, I align more with conservative libertarian crowd. But so how do you work through that political decision making that you just illustrated there?
Right. I'll give you a great example. In the county of Lancaster, we have a group called Respect Farmland, a watchdog group for Lancaster County. And it's the first time I've ever seen citizens push back effectively against development. And we don't really care about anything but farmland. Just leave the farmland alone because we're going to need that. When I was in California for 20 years, every time we tried to push back against the development, didn't matter how, lost. The money just won out. But I'll give you a great example. And there was a development plan that was going to just concrete under 74 acres of farmland in a nearby township. And we really fought that, energized a lot of the citizenry. I mean, literally, there was a point, there were 3 months of meetings on this with the township. And there was a point where an Amish farmer got up to speak, which is unheard of. Because I remember he gets up to speak, he looks over at me, he goes, please, no pictures, because I was filming. I'm like, okay, I turned it off. And he just said, look, if this goes in, we got to move. And one professor had said, you're setting off a nuclear bomb in this Amish community.
Yeah.
Now, we did not win, but the next election, we changed out the town council. It went from heavy Republican to heavy Democrat. We were dissatisfied with those guys. Next election, it was heavy Republican, light Democrat, but Republicans who had seen the light about development. So it was awesome. And now, I'm convinced that development will not happen with all the kinks we've been able to put in it. So it is. And that's, well, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, it's really this amazing group. Because one thing that's probably unique about Lancaster, it's got a strong Anabaptist tradition, the strong Mennonite Amish community, and it's long lived here. I'm an Auslander. I'm an outsider. And you're really not considered an insider unless you've been here 5 generations. And I know people who've been here 9 generations. Like one of the places we'd meet is a farm that was built in 1750.
No way. Wow,
Yeah,
that's so cool.
it really is. So you need that tradition. That's probably where my conservative roots lie. And it's so important to preserve tradition. This, and we see it. I love preserving old architecture. Like here in my, and I'll give you another example of things that didn't go well. So in the late 50s and 60s, there was a mayor here who the old part of the town, the town core was blighted. And so how do you fix it? Well, a new urbanist would tell you, well, you start with the sidewalks, and you take little bets and you find what's working, you reinforce what's working. Well, at this time, you had all these modernists, coming in with architecture, and they just tore down these amazing, you'd weep if you saw the buildings that were ripped down. And they poured concrete and created these brutalist pieces of architecture, county building, the bull of a building, just awful. And then we come later to find, so in 1971, that mayor gets indicted for corruption. So he's making money on every bucket of cement that's poured. And so much when we see the degradation of our cities, there's an inherent corruption. Like, right now I'm fighting in my city. The BBC said, we are the poster child for refugee resettlement in America, this county. And there are people in this county that really are offended by the Anabaptist roots of this county, the Amish and everything. And they just want to see it, the olds, get rid of the olds, bring in the news. And they have no idea what the news are going to be. And this lack of trust of our traditions is really gut-wrenching for me to watch and see it played out. And you see it played out, and unfortunately, many democratic cities. The city of Lancaster is a blue city inside a very red county. So I see it play out on a daily basis here, and it's not good. It's the problem solving starts because the ideology takes over.
Right.
It's like we gotta fix it. This is why I was probably excited about Ross Perot's running. He said, I just want to get in another car and fix things, and that's what we need from our leaders. That's what we should be paying for, but unfortunately, it's not what we're getting.
Right, more tinkerers and less power.
Yes, exactly. Let's spitball this. We'll figure that out. That sewer line broke. Well, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this. We're going to solve that problem, and maybe we'll solve it in a way that we won't have to revisit it for another 100 years.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the worst thing we can do is to surround ourselves with people, and this is obviously what happens in the city, it happens in the country, surround ourselves with people who believe exactly the same thing as we do. It's so important to hear other points of view and then to use those opinions to make our own informed decision. So that's why I love what I do. I want to hear I'm a sponge. I want to hear every angle, every nuance, and then strategize about, okay, what dominoes will fall if we do this? Which ones will fall if we do this? Like on those various paths. So what advice do you have for people who are set like concrete in their ideology? What are the possible consequences of staying there?
Well, that's the problem. You have this bias reinforcement, and I'll see it when, having been on all sides of the political spectrum, it doesn't matter, because you get one person alone with a couple other people, and they will have an exchange. But when you get a group together where there's a dominant narrative, it just either moves further to the right or further to the left. And all of a sudden, it's like you can't have that conversation anymore. And perhaps, Chrissy, and I don't want to sound fatalist here, but it could be the times. I subscribe to this view of what's become known as the fourth turning. It's these demographic cycles that happen. And the authors of this idea of fourth turning, it's, the fact that demographics play into economics and all kinds of decisions isn't new for us. I mean, this goes back to a Russian economist named Kondratiev, who said, wow, these economic cycles kind of match the life of a long-lived human being. Imagine that. And where Strauss and Howard, their fourth turning, come in is they break that 80-year cycle into four turnings, roughly 20 years a generation. And we are in what they call the fourth turning. 85 years ago, we were on the brink of total war, economic stagnation. 85 years before that, the Civil War, total war. 85 years before that, the American Revolution. Wow. So what happens is the institutions that had been built up in the first turning are no longer serving us, much like they are now. I mean, other than Social Security, I don't know any other institution that's working for us. Our healthcare institution, our education institutions. Government is not working for us. The military-industrial complex certainly isn't working for us. So what happens is all these things will get torn down and they'll get rebuilt and they'll be responsive to us. So in a way, that's where we are. And that's where we're seeing this polarization, because, in 1854, I'm sure most Americans, other than, people like you read the letters of General Tecumseh Sherman, they were living in fear of a civil war because he had been living in the North and the South, and understood what was going on and where the passions lie. And here, I think, once again, people are becoming really polarized, really passionate, and that middle ground doesn't exist. It's, and this isn't new. You can go back, if you read Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian Wars, he talks about how there was a point in Athens where, like, say, you and I could have a disagreement. I might say, Chrissy, I'll give you that point, but you're wrong here, here, and here. But it got to that point, this level where that would be considered treason for me to just give you that, acquiesce on something to you, because it becomes so tribal, which is kind of where we are now. So I would like to think, knowing that we are these creatures of political habit, if we can look at them, like, if you've ever done therapy, people will say, well, look at yourself in the third person. Just, Kevin is doing this. And if we can kind of say, oh, wow, I'm in a meeting and I'm mouthing this and I really shouldn't be. That's not my true self. It's easy to jump on with what they're saying, because I agree with 80%, but I think if we can look at, if there was some way to go through political therapy for everyone that was, not biased or anything, I think that would be helpful.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Great points there. And I always think about what Brene Brown has a lot of books, but one of them is The Story I Tell Myself. And if you can break that down when you're upset, like especially at your husband or your wife or whatever,
yes,
and you go, okay, well, he didn't take out the garbage, so he doesn't love me. And then you're like, wait a second, back up. Okay, what is the story I'm telling myself? Obviously, he still loves me. He just didn't take out the garbage, right? But if we could apply that to these bigger issues too, we might be able to actually sit down and discuss things at the table like we used to, right?
Yeah, like a politician said this, but the reality is, okay, looking at it, if they would have given us the truth there, would we have responded? Well, maybe they were just trying to say, okay, we got to come together here on this. All right, I'll give them, yeah, exactly. Taking that, sit back and say, yeah, doesn't mean they don't love us. Right. or maybe it means they don't love us. But we have to be able to look more objectively at things and less tribally. When I was early on in the Democratic Party, I went to a meeting, and there was this woman who was, she I think was the accountant for the state party or something. And she's like, I'm a Democrat because my parents were Democrats and their parents were. And I'm like, that's probably the wrong reason. You're probably not gonna be thinking rationally
This
when
isn't
someone's,
football.
yeah, exactly. And the funny thing, someone was trying to give me the sports analogy to like, oh, people, Americans much rather watch sports. And I said, well, I think the fans have much better technical knowledge of sports than people who claim to be politicos have of politics and what's actually going on.
Good point.
So I'm like, I'll give it to the fans there. It's like, because if you talk to someone, it's like, wow, that guy did blah. Like, no, you don't understand. His RBI was this and this and this, and he's dealing with an injury, and it's like, oh, okay, I see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Wow. Now, switching gears a little bit, the first article that you wrote that really caught my attention was titled DeSantis Trolls America, and that's a good thing. Now, I will totally admit I'm very biased here because I traded Trudeau and Cuomo for DeSantis a few years ago, and I have not looked back. Hurricanes and all, whatever. I'm still okay with my decision. So in the article, you stated, I don't think my views have changed significantly, and especially when viewed against the perspective of the Overton window. So this is where I learned that you were once a well-known progressive and former executive board member of the California Democratic Party, like you just said. And I'm now, like, I'm sure your former colleagues might look at you and think that you've lost your mind. But why is DeSantis trolling America a good thing? Explain that.
right, because DeSantis, and I'll be the first to say, look, I'm a Trump guy, but I could never say anything bad about DeSantis.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, this is a guy who I have seen carry the water, put himself out there, take great political risk, and actually serve the people of Florida doing pragmatic things. I mean, you can kind of rest assured and say, well, I got a governor like DeSantis, and even though like here in Pennsylvania, I wasn't keen on, I didn't vote for Shapiro, but I got to say, Shapiro seems to understand how to manage the bureaucracy and get things done, which is quite helpful. That's kind of what I'd expect, from someone like that. So when you troll, what you're doing is you're trying to get people's worser natures out so they can get them out and identify them and look at them, is what I consider trolling. And I think it's a good thing that he's doing. He's out there because it's at that time. Well, at that time, it's a little different. Things have always changed, but at that time, I thought it was good that he was doing things that would. It was hitting that hornet's nest of wokeness, with his thoughts on. What we're teaching our children in schools, because again, it's this war on tradition. It's for anyone who, we got here where we are, whether you want to look at 200 and some odd years of American history or 40,000 years of being a Homo sapiens. We are where we are for a reason, and it's rooted in some tradition or another, or our biology. And when we think that we can somehow change things with an edict by some government fiat, that's really dangerous. And what DeSantis does when he was trolling at that time is he was putting it out there. And he was also serving as a beacon for others to say, look, this is how you display backbone. And I think that was really helpful for America at that time, to see a governor of a large state like Florida do that. And we have seen that happen. For instance, the treasurer of West Virginia is a fellow by the name of Riley Moore. And where he pushed back against the ESG, not just verbally and admonishing what was going on, but he's like, wait a minute, the wealth of West Virginia is in the ground, and they're telling us we've got to get rid of everything that's in the ground, the coal, all the tin, all of this stuff. So he pushed back, and what he did was he went to the banks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and he said, you have these ESG requirements. Well, US Bank, you don't have those, so get ready to get a lot more of West Virginia business. Oh, and BlackRock, all these, guess what? We're not going to put our money with you. We're going to do something else
I
with it.
love those. Those were the days. I just wish you'd start doing some of those again. It was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
every day
Well,
there was just another check, 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 right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is 14 other states followed
Yeah.
Riley's move. And I think that is a really awesome thing. So
Yeah.
that's where trolling is good, when you become
Yeah.
that lightning rod. And it requires a lot of backbone, though,
Yeah.
at the end of the day. You know, you look at Trump, I mean, his early days, I think he misspelled words in tweets just because they would have to report on it. So here they are reporting on how he misspelled this, but millions of people are now watching that. So
Right. Yeah, it's counterintuitive counterintuitive, a lot of it, right? Yeah.
exactly. It plays to emotionality, but that's, you know, where we are. There's so many levers out there we have to pull in order to get things done during the day. But you know, it's interesting because you had talked about how, you know, people thinking I'm crazy or I've lost my mind. Uh, for us as an organization, where it is really hurt is in funding,
Mm.
because there are people that it's like, you have lost your mind. And we can't. This is our agenda here. This is our space and our institutions. You know, I have people saying, you know, because you know, I expressed that I'm very pro Donald Trump or President Trump, and they're like, well, regardless of where he stands on immigration, he's a greater threat to democracy. Like, okay, here's a guy that was popularly elected
Yeah.
in a democratic election without, we've proven, no Russian collusion,
Mhm.
and yet you're resisting and keeping him from ruling. Now, who's less democrat? Who's more of a threat to our democratic institutions?
Right. That's it. And if
One
you say
man?
cite, yeah, you say cite your sources, they just name a newspaper.
Yeah,
Right.
right. And there are, you know, the New York Times is unfortunately the nation's toilet paper of record. And again, where I don't get with understand is that people that I know, for instance, that I knew back in the progressive movement in 2004, we knew how much that, you know, we knew the New York Times lied about weapons of mass destruction. You know, we know they lied about Gulf of Tonkin way back in the 60s. And they continue to lie. And yet they'll they will pull out something and say, "Oh no, look what's in the New York Times. They said Russian collusion or something." It's like, and you're not, because it suits your narrative. You're not being skeptical of them at this point. So that's again that critical thinking is, I think, absent from most people because I think we have such a history of being marketed to, you know, when
Right. Yeah.
we grow up, kids watching cartoons, you know, we're being told to eat cereal with lots of sugar in it. And that turns the
Yes.
milk a different color. And I think it's easy to buy things. And every once in a while, I will run into someone who, when you look at how they live their lives, like they make their own wine, they make their own butter, they have a group of friends that, let's say the water pump breaks, they'll start to work on it and other people will come over and help them fix it. They seem to be the most immune to a lot of this, the ones most apt to be critical thinkers.
Mhm. Yep. I definitely agree. Um, so let's go through some of the issues that you speak out on yourself and then within your organization. Um, I know you've recently spent some time at the border
Yes.
and you've spoken to Congress. I believe it was Congress,
Mm-hmm.
about what you learned there. So can you tell us about that first?
Oh, well, I actually spoke to Congress about an issue of foreign doctors
Oh,
versus
okay.
us developing our own doctors and actually throwing our own doctors overboard in favor of foreign
Oh,
doctors. But I'll talk about that as well. But yeah, I
yeah.
was at the border with great people. I'll tell you, I was down there with Ann Vanderstill, Michael Yon, Tyler Kramer, uh, really wonderful patriots who are out there doing great work. They call it Operation Burning Edge. So there, I got to go down and actually speak to border agents And what I found, I was in a place called La Jolla, Texas, down by, just like the border is half a mile away. And it was early in the morning, and all these migrants were there, they were being, arrested by Border Patrol, and then they were going to be put on buses and then processed. And we can talk about that later. But I was talking to the Border Patrol agents, and I said, well, how many migrants do you process in a week? And he goes, the Rio Grande Valley sector, which is the Rio Grande River, we apprehend 20,000 people a week.
Wow.
Wow. You can't process. So all it is catch and release, and as the great, Michael Yon, starting actually a year and a half ago, he was taking groups, even congressmen, down to that area called the Darien Gap, which is right between Guatemala and Panama. And it is like jungle is, and Michael's an old special forces guy. So if he tells you something is jungle, it's jungle. And, people were making their way up by the tens of thousands, and hundreds were dying along the way of exposure, drowning, because there would be flash flooding, and also being preyed on by the I forget the name of the tribe, the Ambara Indian. And because we might as well rob them. They're coming through, and they're destroying all of our infrastructure. So but Michael was reporting that a lot of people coming up are from over 150 countries. He interviewed 3 guys from China, all in military ages. One of them, it was early, it was like 3 a.m. The guy had, their version of what we call chiggers up here, things that get under your skin. He was tired and he was pretty wore out. And so Michael, having been a trained interrogator, got a lot of information from him. And, he'd fallen into the dialect that they're taught at the Ministry of State Security schools and everything. And, these people are obvious agents. And just recently, it was revealed that Chechens associated with ISIS were apprehended and then released into the public. I mean, known ISIS agents. So there's no vetting going on. And the sad thing is, this is all a result of policy. This isn't like we were having this demographic spike all over the world or climate change. Like, no, the Biden administration said, if you come, we're not going to stop you. We're not going to deter you. And during the primary of 2016, all the Democrats were on stage, and they asked them about, would you give health care to illegal immigrants? All of them raised their hand. Absolutely. Everyone, I mean, what's the difference between that and like a George W. Bush saying, any willing person who wants to come here and work should? I mean, that's how bad it is. And I call it the immigration industrial complex, because there's a bunch of players in this. One of those players are what I call volunteer agencies. These are Catholic Charities, which is part of the Conference of Catholic Bishops, Lutheran Refugee Services, Church World Services. And they all are part of this racket because they get paid per head to resettle. Where it used to be just, declared refugees who might be designated a refugee by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and they're sent here. Oh, no, it's no longer just asylee is a technical term driven by statute. But what we have are now asylum seekers, and they're all getting paid to relocate this, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars. So It's quite the racket. And while I was down there, I did in San Antonio in front of a Catholic Charities. I was with George Rodriguez, and we were interviewing people outside the center who, family from Ecuador. They'd just gotten their papers. They were heading off to Chicago the next day. And then there was one guy from Venezuela who, he wants to get to Boston, but he doesn't have his paperwork yet. I mean, and there were Haitians outside. There is no one they're economic migrants is what they are. And like I said, there's no demographics driving this. In the late 80s, 90s, there was a demographic spike in Latin America, which is why we started seeing a lot more people from Latin America, in the southern, like California. But that's not the case right now. So it's really people winning a better life. And what I asked the bishop in Los Angeles years ago was, where would you recommend Americans immigrate to? The ones who've been they're either unemployed, underemployed, or simply given up looking for work here. Where would you recommend they immigrate to get a better life? He didn't really have.
Is there an answer? I haven't thought of one.
I can't recall his answer, but he was a trained Jesuit, and when he was giving me the answer, all I could think was, "You slick son of a boy, that was a good." And it was like, you said nothing, but you said a lot. So
Amazing. Wow. So what direction should we be going in? What mindset should we, be putting the armor on as we come into this season?
Okay, I think what we need to do is, as a country, it would be, this is where, when Ross Perot ran for president, he would do these 30-minute ads with charts and graphs and everything, looking at the national deficit and everything. We need to absolutely insist. Like, I thought the Republican debate of last week was a disaster. And it was a disaster because it took them an hour and a half to even bring up immigration. And they're talking about things like abortion. No. Focus on things like the national debt. Not because, well, there's a national debt. It's like, what situation does this put us in as a country? Let's talk about the fact that during the pandemic, we couldn't produce needed medicines.
Exactly.
Let's talk about, the Ukraine. Let's have an honest conversation about that. And why are we giving them $100 billion plus? And we have all this poverty in our streets. And speaking of the poverty in our streets, what sense, and this is what I said to my city council in Lancaster, which met with a lot of gas, literally people were clutching their pearls. I'm like, we can't deal with the homeless outside my loft. Why are you injecting more poor people into this equation?
Yeah.
How do we benefit from this? And the people need to be looking at these issues, because it's easy to get gaslit and say, oh, that's really not an issue. It's like, no, things are bad. Job prospects are bad. When I was a kid, I graduated from high school in 1980 and went in the Army. And at that time, Chrissy, in terms of earning a living, I could have gotten a job at any one of 4 manufacturers in my town. It was like Fason, Olean Tile, and do a few years at those places. And, a few years later, through some connections, get on at Bethlehem Steel, work for 30 years, get the watch, get the pension and everything. That's what the world was like then. And now there are no, these jobs that are available are pretty much garbage jobs. One, they're not paying living wages like you'd expect. And so the solution is, go in debt and get a degree. Well, guess what? You're still a wage slave at that point. And we've seen where, and again, this is probably why I'm so dogmatic when it comes to immigration. We were told to learn to code when they began to offshore all our jobs. Well, Americans did. I mean, they responded to that deficit in IT and computer science, science, technology, engineering, math. And what did they do? Well, they create the H-1B visa, and they bring over hundreds of thousands of people. And or through the O-1, now there's a visa called Optional Practical Training, OPT. It's a work authorization for 3 years. So if you go to college, you're a foreign student, you go to college, get a advanced STEM degree, well, guess what? You can get a 3-year work authorization to work anywhere in the US. The employer can pay you anything they want, because at least with H-1B, there's a prevailing wage. It's low, but and the employer doesn't have to say FICA or Social Security. They don't have to put that into the mix. So who are they going to hire? So that first rung where someone graduates from college, let's say they got an engineering degree, they're pushed out of the way by someone with an OPT who's looking to get on there, then get on an H-1B, and then get a green card. And it's, again, this is that immigration industrial complex, because universities love this. I mean, for the average American, they don't necessarily get a bachelor's and then a master's in computer science. They're usually, if they're a gifted coder, they'll probably leave after 2 years and go right into the workforce. At least that's the way it was. Or they'll get their bachelor's and, but, all these programs like OPT have created this hunger of foreign students for advanced degrees. So departments have really ballooned with their presence. That's why, at one Arizona college that I won't name, it's all foreign students in their advanced computer science programs or advanced engineering programs. Why? Not for the skills, not because they're gifted, but because it's a pathway to citizenship.
Right. Makes sense.
So that's the problem. We've been lied to. And people just have to stop being so gullible. Like, there are jobs, like when they say there are jobs Americans won't do, it's like, no, there are jobs Americans will do. And there's jobs Americans need to be doing, but they're going to want to do them at a living wage. They're going to do them with decent OSHA enforcement, benefits. I like visiting that song 16 tons every Labor Day. 16 tons, another day older, deeper in debt. It's about a coal miner and how it's hard. It was hard, backbreaking work. But Americans did those jobs, and unfortunately we've acculturated Americans saying, oh, I don't pick up garbage, I don't do landscaping, and we need to and by tightening the labor supply, we'll return Americans to doing those jobs, and the wages will be there, but it requires a tight labor supply, which is something the immigration industrial complex doesn't seem to want to give us.
Right. Yeah. Wow. There's so much to take away from this conversation. A lot.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, Chrissy. I'm just yakking here. And I
love it. I'll be up thinking about it tonight for sure and all weekend. But I do have one last question for you. Why do you serve in this way? What are you most passionate about? Because you're so passionate about all of these things, but what is it that really gets you?
Good question. I like politics and I like the thought of solving a problem. And it's not always easy in the nonprofit world to do that, because what I'd learned, I kind of thought this was the case prior to 2017 and taking over the organization, but I really believe it now. The problem with the nonprofit world is if you solve the problem, you don't earn a paycheck anymore doing that. I wish I could remember her name, but her and her husband own a number of big businesses like Fiji Waters. They own the almond business, FTD Florists. And she was speaking at a luncheon years ago, and she had told a story of one of the founders of Sears and Roebuck had a nonprofit. And in his will, he said, you have 39 years to spend everything down in this. And then after that, you close the doors. So he's basically, you accomplish the mission in 39 years and then go away. And I really think that, so I am passionate. Politics, solving problems, immigration is one aspect of that I focus a lot on. And I was very energetic about stopping things like the North American Free Trade Agreement, General Agreement on tariffs and trade, World Trade Organization, all those things that offshored so many good middle class jobs. That's my passion. That keeps me going. If I solve immigration, I'll just go on and find something else to do in this realm, or I'll go back to making crappy little video commercials for the internet, which is what I was doing before. I'll go back into doing property tax work. And I think that's one of the benefits of, going into the nonprofit world late in life. I'm over 60, and you have other alternatives. You haven't been in this thing all your life, and you're not looking, wow, if we solve this, what do I do? It's like, no, there's so many things to do. So for, when you've lived a life that's been varied in terms of career paths and stuff, you'll always find things. So if that's the take, I know I kind of diverted a little bit from what you said, but that's kind of the takeaway when I think of things like that.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. There's, I always think, someday when I'm bored, I'm going to do this. That day never, ever comes. I know and understand people that are like, oh, I'm so bored. Wow, what does that feel like?
Yeah.
Can't even imagine.
I know. It's something, and the nice thing about what I do, and I do love it. And the people who work with me, they're just the most. You met Joe Gazzardi. He's a great guy. He's great. Maria, who's our IT, Roger, Brian. I mean, everyone, we have a group of people now that are really passionate about what we're doing. And I would say another thing, and I don't know how your audience is going to respond to this. On the surface, we're kind of fighting immigration and, well, looking at immigration, but also globalization, neoliberalism. But beyond that, Chrissy, we're fighting evil. There are some really malevolent forces at play out here, and they've co-opted a lot of people, and some through bribery, others because, well, they'll listen to people that are these demagogues, or they believe in systems that are failing them, and they just don't know how to respond and fight back. But there's something very evil. Margaret Thatcher mentioned this in the 1980s. I remember when I was living in Europe, working at Shape, and I didn't understand. I thought she was just crazy, but I don't think so. I think she understood something there.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And I think that Tucker Carlson's speech at Heritage Foundation the day before he was fired also hit the nail on the head. And he said the same thing, right?
Yeah.
You're dealing with good and evil, light and dark. And I guess we either have to become warriors or we got to get out of the way.
Yeah, it's I have a friend who's in a hard way right now, but in a way I think she's recklessly courageous, but I'm grateful for that level of courage. And when I see it, what was that song from the Shake, well, not the song, but the one phrase from where the king is addressing the soldiers before the Battle of Agincourt, and he goes, "Those not here today will hold themselves cheap."
Wow.
And when I see an act of courage, I just hold myself cheap and say, "Oh my God, I need to be kicking my game up a level or two." So,
yeah, I get it. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for this conversation. You did not disappoint, and I hope that we can do this again.
I hope so, Chrissy. Thanks so much for your time. And I'll have to have you on our show to talk about your journey, because I'm really interested in that. It's and I love agriculture, and I think what you guys are doing is so important. Unfortunately, so many young people that are getting into farming are having to face the fact that they're working for minimum wage at the end of the day. We should be doing as a society, in Japan, I remember I was dating someone who was Asian, and when the parents found out that I'd grown up on a farm, it's like, oh, that's a whole new status. Yeah, you're a soldier, but you were a farmer. Farmers. It's an amazing class of people. I think Victor Davis Hanson. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a conservative, he's a professor. He's written a lot of books on
Right. I read
Greek
one of his
history.
books recently. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, he wrote a book, and it's not one of his more popular ones. It's called The Other Greeks.
Hmm.
And his thesis is the whole concept of democracy didn't come out of the Greek city-states. It started with the Greek farmers. Because, I mean, what made them any different than the Persians with the peasants and all? The Greeks had independent farmers. So these guys made all their own decisions. Do I turn that into an olive orchard? What am I going to do this winter? Repair buy a fishing boat, work on that, get that ready to go. Do I buy my neighbor's land? What should I plant? All these independent decisions that were either small or life and death. And I think that's where this real spirit of that was to me, well, to Hansen and to me as well, that's the cradle of democracy. And we see that in that the farmer and like Wendell Berry, he calls it agriculture.
Oh, I like that.
The whole culture that was built up around producing food and animal husbandry. It's just so I think what you're doing is amazing, and I know you have to be attracting more people into saying, maybe I could do that, maybe I should be doing that, and I think that would be an amazing thing.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, the links are provided in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to North American Egg Spotlight on YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram channels. And the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Listen Notes, or really wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can find it all at northamericanegg.com. And if you liked the episode, I would love it if you shared it. And have a great day.